Welcome to Lawyer on the Line.
Welcome to our first Lawyer on the Line podcast. I'm Roger Reedmiller, and I have been practicing law in the state of Kansas for 39 years, handling workers' compensation, personal injury, automobile accident, and truck accident claims here in the state of Kansas. Here in the last 10, 15 years, I started focusing more on doing work comp and automobile truck accidents, uh, where the injured individual is a victim of a truck accident or negligence due to a truck driver's conduct. And that is an area of the law that is both very interesting and needs a lot of expertise, and a lot of people need a lot of help in, because these are very complex claims. Lawyer on the Line was a show that I did for 17 years on Cake Channel 10. And with me here today is my partner, Mark Scott, who appeared on Lawyer on the Line on a number of occasions. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing good, Roger. Thank you.
So I started practicing law back in 1993. So I've got about 33 years of experience. My practice started out as mainly automobile and insurance law. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to handle a number of trucking cases. And the more I handled those cases, the more interested I got, because they are very complex, and there's a lot of areas of those type of cases that the normal person doesn't really understand the key factors, how things that some of us would think, well, how is that important? But there are a lot more important facts that come out in those type of cases. So learning about those areas of the law, including taking a truck driving class actually at a place for a 4-day course, was a learning experience that has really helped me in getting more prepared to handle these type of cases. Well, you actually went through the process of the coursework for getting a CDL, a commercial driver's license. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. Partly during COVID, I started doing a lot of studying and thought, maybe a good idea to go ahead and get a CDL. So I prepared myself by taking a lot of practice tests and reading the various manuals that are used in truck driving schools to teach people how to drive a commercial motor vehicle, including I went out and took the written test. But I didn't get to taking the driving test yet, but that's still something that I'm looking into.
But through that process, I've come to learn that this really isn't just a collision between a large vehicle and a car or small vehicle. It's just not these types of collisions are just not a version of a bigger accident. There's a lot more that goes on.
Yeah, there is. The first thing that everybody realizes is the size difference between these two vehicles. A fully loaded commercial motor vehicle can weigh as much as 80,000 pounds. When you compare that to a normal passenger car, which usually is in the $3,500 to $4,000 pound weight, then you can see there's a huge disparity between those vehicles. And unfortunately, we find that when there's a crash with a motor vehicle, it's almost always the car that loses that battle.
Well, and then there's also the issue of federal regulation. In an ordinary collision between two vehicles, usually we're not dealing with any type of regulation, but there's a particular regulation in truck accidents we have to deal with.
Yes. So the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration was tasked by Congress with coming up with rules that would be on the federal level, so they apply throughout the United States, making it the laws there very consistent. And so those regulations are something that need to be studied in depth, because a truck crash and an automobile crash are definitely very different. You've got a whole bunch of different entities that can be involved in the truck accident. Car versus car, you got both drivers. Every once in a while, we find a negligent entrustment type issue, but generally, who's responsible, how it happened is pretty straightforward. Reviewing the crash report, And just doing an investigation generally gives us enough facts to make a determination of who's at fault in something like that. But when we're looking at a truck crash, not only is the crash report different, but the various things that have to be looked at are totally different. With a normal crash, you have a Kansas Motor Vehicle crash report, but in a truck crash, you also have a examination of the driver and the vehicle that often follows a serious crash, because there's a lot more information that it comes into play.
So, so, but let's go to a collision. We all understand. We've watched many shows. We've seen many accidents involving collisions between vehicles, and usually it comes down to a police report and maybe an eyewitness. What is already in motion in the early stages of a truck accident that's different than an automobile?
Sure, there are some key things that, and most people when they hear this are very, very surprised. But once a crash occurs, it's not uncommon for the truck company to have a representative that gets to the scene even before an investigation is complete. There are teams of attorneys that most of these companies have hired that are ready to go on a moment's notice to go out and investigate a scene. Plus, some of them have a specialized reconstruction team, investigative team that they send out. But literally, crash happens, the phone starts being used, and before you know it, there's somebody with special information coming out to do an investigation that's going to be a little bit different than the investigation that the highway patrol or the sheriff or police officer is going to make.
Yeah, and so you're the victim of one of these collisions. You're in the hospital, probably with more severe injuries than you would have had in an ordinary automobile accident, but not always. What are you doing to investigate? What access do you have to try to make sure that your rights are being protected and the facts are being reported accurately?
Sure. There's one of the key things that is very important in investigating this type of a crash, and this is usually happens days after, but is sending out a preservation letter. And a preservation letter would go out to sometimes the driver, definitely the motor carrier, the company that the driver's driving for. And then it also can go out to their insurance company. And this letter is very specific, asking for detailed information to be preserved rather than allowed to just be lost due to time. This can be as simple as dash cam. Most of the large companies these days use dash cams, and some of that information, a video camera
Right there on their dash, right?
correct. And it oftentimes has a forward facing camera that's showing the traffic that the driver is approaching, but many of them also have a driver facing camera. And so that can be very helpful to determine what happened. And sadly, that information oftentimes disappears.
Well, where does it go? What do you mean disappear?
Well, most of this information is either going to be recorded onto the device itself, maybe a SIMS card. Some of it is sent to the cloud. But if it's one of those systems that's just recording to the dash cam, it's going to be on a loop often. And so you get to a certain period and that footage just becomes overwritten. Now, sometimes it gets deleted, but even without fault to anybody, it could just be overwritten. So getting a letter out to all of the involved players on the side of the trucking company is very important.
And to top it off, typically, if you're involved in an automobile accident, you get the name of the driver, right?
Yes.
Does it really help you to get the name of the truck driver? Sure, right?
Yes.
But isn't there a lot more to that than just getting the name of the driver? You want to know who they're employed by. You want to know the ownership interests and all kinds of things, correct?
That's correct. In these type of cases, what we find is there's not just one cause for the collision. There's a failure along the way, and sometimes multiple failures. So in just your typical car crash, you usually have just people with normal driver's licenses, not professionals, and but in the trucking cases, you've got a whole bunch of different entities out there that could have responsibility. So obviously a driver is going to be responsible for his or her actions, but the motor carrier has duties from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to make sure that things are done to properly train drivers, make sure that they're following hours of service, making sure that the route for their trip is being handled appropriately. And so we often find that we have a driver that we're looking at for responsibility, a motor carrier. If there was some type of a mechanical problem with the semi or the tractor, sometimes you have to look and see who did maintenance on the vehicle or the trailer to see where this chain of events that ended up causing the crash began with.
And most of these things you're talking about, you correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the things you're talking about involve a fair amount of federal and state regulation.
Yes, most definitely. There's simple things like a pre-trip inspection. And those are very important, but what happens if the driver finds something that's faulty with the vehicle? Well, they're supposed to, when they find something that is a problem, they are supposed to make out a report that then goes to the motor carrier. And before that semi goes out again, that error or problem with the vehicle needs to be addressed and fixed to make the vehicle roadworthy. So sometimes we find that, well, there was an inspection done by the driver. He found that a blinker wasn't operating properly, or maybe the reflection tape was old and dirty. Well, he or she has a duty to report that to the motor carrier, and then the motor carrier has the duty of assuring that that's fixed before that vehicle is put back on the road. So we've got, in that instance, maybe 3 different entities that could come into play.
But not only do you have federal regulations that require reporting of defects or damage or mechanical problems with vehicles, but you also have the same thing as it applies to the drivers. Is that correct?
Most definitely. There's hours of service requirements. Drivers can only be on the road for so long. They can only be physically in having signed into their job, on hours. Part of their time might be not driving, but still on duty, doing their inspection, helping getting the vehicle prepped for leaving, sometimes loading the vehicle with the cargo. All those things have to happen within that. There's a set time limit where how long a driver can be driving and or working. So those are regulations that definitely play into these type of crashes.
And of course, we all know about most people have heard of a trucker's log book that they're supposed to keep in their glove compartment box. Well, that's kind of old stuff. They don't do that anymore for the most part. Is that correct?
That's correct. So now we have what are called ELDs, electronic logging devices. And those devices took the place of the paper document that the driver would fill out every day at every break. At every stop, the driver has to go in there and put a marking on their log showing what they're doing. Now we've got a electronic version of that, and part of it is driver input, part of it is vehicle input. When the driver puts it into drive and starts driving, that automatically changes the duty status to driving. And when he stops, the vehicle's gonna that recorder's going to record the stop and how long it was stopped. And interestingly, sometimes it has, actually almost always it's got GPS information in there, which can be very interesting information to dig up on certain cases.
The GPS is relative to the trucker or the truck?
It would be relative to the truck itself.
Okay.
It's going to be working out of that electronic log device. Sometimes they have a Garmin or something also in their vehicle, but it could be very interesting. I've had a case a while back where the electronic log data did not match the data for the GPS that was in the vehicle too, and that's got us scratching our head and trying to figure out, because even though these devices are electronic, they sometimes can still be manipulated by a driver or even by a company to make changes to the log. And we've seen that, unfortunately.
So you've talked about some of the complexities of these truck auto collisions. Is it one of the first and most common mistake made by folks is waiting to see what they should do before they do anything?
Sure. Somebody that has a serious injury, their focus is on getting bail. Well, sometimes they're in the hospital and they can't do anything for themselves. And during that time period, critical things are happening, if not on their end, definitely on the motor carrier's end, doing all kinds of investigations. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Timing is very critical.
Well, uh, I remember way back when we used to go look at the scene of a simple automobile accident because it didn't appear from talking to the police and talking to the witness that we understood what had happened. Now, with all of electronic devices we can bring to bear, we can go to the scene of an accident and take pictures. Isn't that basically what the insurance company does or the trucking representative does right after the accident?
They are doing those things, but sometimes it gets a little nefarious. I remember a case where it became clear that when the trucking company's representative, investigator, whoever it was out at the scene, they were going through the injured client's vehicle, went through the glove box, and they were looking for anything they could have that would be something they could use against the injured person. And that happened without any consent being given. So it can sometimes be very surprising what happens.
So getting started quickly and early is a critical mistake to avoid.
It is. Yeah. Timing is everything. Sometimes you think, well, it may look like I'm claim happy if I get an attorney involved too soon, but the insurance companies are doing that exact thing. They are getting their attorneys involved, their investigators involved, because they're trying to do anything they can to reduce liability and to control the case.
I should say, I think I misspoke. It's not getting someone to help you is the first and biggest mistake you could make right after an accident. The second thing I hear all of the time as a common mistake is giving a recorded statement.
Yeah, recording statements, I recommend that they not be given. Your own insurance company, under certain circumstances, has a right to get a statement from you, but the insurance company for the liability carrier does not have that right. If you ask them when they're asking you, "Hey, can I talk to your driver?" They're not going to be letting you talk to their driver. Why? Because they don't want you getting information from that driver. The same reason why a person injured should be very careful about giving a recorded statement. At a minimum, it would be wise to have an attorney involved at that stage.
It's also a question to some extent, isn't it, of being in sound mind and body. If after an accident you've sustained a serious injury, you're probably not in the best position to be telling the story again in a statement.
Very true.
Okay.
Very true.
The third most common um, thing that I see in today's world is social media and posting.
Yeah, and let's wrap it up by talking about that. So social media is a tool that insurance companies are using from the get-go to get reconnaissance on you, see who you are. What they want to see, of course, is you out doing something after a crash that you say you can't do, but they are using social media to track you, see what you're saying online, doing all kinds of things with that information. So it's really wise not to discuss any crash online. Uh, Check on if you have an injury and you let people know, that's not the big deal. But when you start talking about the facts of the crash, you're just giving away that information, and you just need to be careful.
So, in a nutshell, what one thing would you hope people would take from this podcast uh, after listening to us?
I think the big takeaway is that this is not just a car crash. It is definitely a motor vehicle crash with a commercial motor vehicle that has many different areas that need to be investigated. And unfortunately, to do that, it's often best to consult with an attorney who's had experience doing those type of cases.
All right, we're just about out of time. Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you are the victim of a truck automobile accident, don't wait. Talk to an attorney. The sooner the better. At least you'll get an understanding of your rights and you'll learn what you should or shouldn't do. Probably need to hire an attorney, but do not wait. That will kill your case. Thank you, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.